Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast series focusing on critical business decisions. Brought to you by Brady Ware & Company. Brady Ware is a regional, full-service accounting and advisory firm that helps businesses and entrepreneurs make visions a reality.
Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast giving you, the listener, clear vision to make great decisions. In each episode, we discuss the process of decision-making on a different topic from the business owner's or executive's perspective. We aren't necessarily telling you what to do, but we can put you in a position to make an informed decision on your own and understand when you might need help along the way. My name is Mike Blake, and I'm your host for today's program. I'm a director at Brady Ware & Company, a full-service accounting firm based in Dayton, Ohio, with offices in Dayton, Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Indiana, and Alpharetta, Georgia. Brady Ware is sponsoring this podcast, which is being recorded in Atlanta for social distancing protocols. If you would like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and at Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast aggregator, and please consider leaving a review of the podcast as well. Today's topic is, should I diversify my company's revenue? And, I'm not sure if this is COVID-driven or not, but it's an interesting topic because I find more companies are asking this question. Certainly, I see more being written about this as to diversifying a company's revenue stream. And I think it's important because it offers an alternative path to growth. We normally think of growth as occurring through two paths. One is by increasing sales and activity in what it is that you already do, or by making an acquisition. And those are both fine. The challenge is that by simply focusing on increasing your activity in what you already do, that's a lot easier said than done. Do you sell harder? Do you work more? Do you make more investments? Is there even room in the market to buy more of what you're selling? And on the other end of the spectrum, there's acquisition, which is expensive, time-consuming, and is fraught with its own risks as well. And so, diversifying revenue, I think, is a little bit of a halfway house between the two, if you will, where you gain the benefits as if perhaps you'd made an acquisition, but you're creating that new revenue stream on your own. And one place I think that we see this in pretty sharp relief is in the restaurant and hospitality industry. In those two particular industries, of course, during the coronavirus, their core operations were sharply curtailed or frankly entirely shut down. And those companies, I know, had to seek and find alternative revenue streams in order to survive. It simply wasn't going to work. They simply were not going to survive otherwise. And I think many other companies, whether through survival or simply, once something is proven, people are going to copy it. I think a lot of other companies now, whether it's in accounting or law or retail, whatnot, are also looking for alternative revenue streams, if you will. And so I suspect that a lot of our listeners, if they're not asking this question yet, they will be either as a result of listening to this podcast, or they will on their own accord in the next year or so, because I do think that this is the next big trend in business is diversifying company revenue by adding new sources of revenue. And joining us today to help us explore this is David Audrain, who is CEO and partner of Exposition Development Company Incorporated, or ExpoDevCo. David is CEO and partner, producing trade shows and conferences across North America. Previously, David was president of Clarion Events North America, president of Messe Frankfurt North America, chief operating officer of Convex, which is the producer of the SEMA show, and held senior positions at Advanced Star, Hanley Wood, Miller Freeman, and the Texas Restaurant Association. As of January 1st, 2016, ExpoDevCo became the management company for CISO, the Society of Independent Show Organizers, where David serves as chief executive officer. Over his more than 28-year career in the exhibition industry, David has managed numerous shows across multiple industries, including 8 top 200 shows in North America. David is also a strong advocate for the industry, having served as chairman of both CISO and the IAEE and on many other boards and committees. Founded in 2012 by David Audrain and Stephanie Everett, Exposition Development Company Incorporated is a show development company designed to produce platform for partnerships with other show organizers and associations to strategically grow existing events as well as launch new events. David, welcome to the program.
Hi, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
So, David, we've had this conversation off air, but of course we're bringing it on air, so to speak. What was it that prompted you to start considering alternative revenue sources, and about when did that take place?
Well, we started our company in January of 2012 and had been running several businesses in the industry for decades before that. So we love the exhibition business. I say I've been in it almost 30 years now, and it's a high volume, high margin business when it works well. But as COVID just showed us for the last year and a half, it doesn't always work well. So we also, though, when we started it, we were not overly heavily capitalized. So we had to be careful how we were utilizing our capital as we got it started. And when you start shows in particular, there is a fairly long ramp up period, a year or more in many cases of getting a show running before it actually happens. And so there's a lot of overhead and staff costs leading into that. So we started at the beginning thinking of ways to minimize our risk. And that meant that not just launching our own shows, but taking on management of other people's shows, other association shows. And what turned into, we even looked at providing sales agency services, which we had done for other international shows around the world in the past, as well as now managing a couple of associations.
And so why consider new revenue streams as opposed to simply doubling down on the existing ones? Why not go that direction?
Well, we certainly, anytime we can launch a new show or expand our show, any of our existing shows, that's certainly optimal. And that's what we try to do. But, if we take a show that is, creating X revenue right now, and we can increase that revenue stream, that's a very high margin business for us, and it's terrific. But it's all your eggs in one basket. If anything happens to that show, as we had to cancel 5 events last year because of COVID, anything happens to that, then you lose the whole basket. So providing different revenue streams, frankly, enabled us to survive COVID. Again, 10 years ago, we didn't plan for COVID. Nobody could have. But we knew that we needed to have different ways to generate revenue that wouldn't put us all at risk all at one time, because some things don't work. We've launched conferences and events that we've had to cancel, and that can be a very expensive process for us.
So as much as anything, it wasn't, and although it was, of course, trying to see growth, but it sounds like also, maybe even more importantly, the need to add additional sources of revenue is also a risk management strategy and a way to build resiliency into the company.
It was very much a risk management strategy. It was very much for the purpose of providing us with potential different streams for cash flow and to minimize some of the risk. Say if we launch a show, we're all in. We are responsible for that entire risk of expense in running that event or conference. If we are running one for somebody else, we have cash flow benefit coming through, and we're not at risk of anything happening to that event. So it minimizes our risk and it improves our cash flow.
So, what I'd love to ask you, I understand that diversifying your revenue sources was a decision that was made and started to be implemented before coronavirus, but of course, coronavirus hit. You could argue it's still here. I call this the trans-pandemic period, not post-pandemic. But my point is that once coronavirus hit, how important was the fact you'd made that decision earlier to ensuring that your company would, frankly, be able to survive coronavirus?
It was key, to be honest with you. We were, we're a small business, 15 employees. We were scheduled to run 11 events last year, several of which we owned or were partners in, some of which we managed for others. More than half we managed for others. We had to cancel all of those, but 2.5. We got through 2 in the beginning, first quarter, and we were halfway through a third before COVID shut us down. And we were also lucky, or should, somewhat good planning, in that we had event cancellation insurance on most of our events, or all of our events that we owned. So we had obviously some results from that as well. But we didn't have to lay off any employees. We were able to continue throughout the year. We obviously were impacted. Obviously, we lost revenue and lost profits for the year. But we had sufficient revenue and sufficient resources to be able to maintain our business. And now we're rolling events out again this year.
So I'm interested. It's hard to find positives in something like a global pandemic, although some were there. And I kind of wonder, and you tell me if I'm just way off base, but was it perhaps even maybe not a blessing in disguise, but at least you were presented maybe perhaps with the opportunity to then redeploy resources within your firm to develop those what had been secondary revenue sources, if you will, had now become primary. And I wonder if, because as a result of that, you emerged actually a stronger company.
I wish I could say that was the case.
Okay.
We had the challenge in our industry in particular was when this all, when we were in lockdown in March of last year, we were all hopeful this would be a few weeks, we'd all be through it, and we'd be able. So in our industry in particular, we started just postponing things. So we had shows in April that we postponed to June. We had shows in May that we postponed to July, that sort of thing. And so we ended up doing twice as much work, sometimes 3 times as much work, because we'd been planning for events for a year. We then, at some period, whether we were a month out, a week out, I had to cancel one event. We were a week out at the end of March. So we'd been planning for a year up in Boston. And we started off by postponing it and then repostponing it. And then eventually canceling it. And then we had to cancel it again at the beginning of this year. So there was an awful lot of work that went into those and took up an awful lot of our staff's time. And in the end, in most cases, we didn't get anything out of it at all. So we had to ensure that we utilized our resources appropriately to continue managing the clients we had for where we were managing their events or managing the associations. And in fact, since the association we run is actually the association for our industry, we ended up having to do 5 times as much work just helping all the rest of our industry through this crisis.
That's fascinating. I mean, and it shows my lack of knowledge of your industry. It hadn't occurred to me that, in effect, you'd sort of have this rolling blackout, if you will, within your industry. That there's a hope that the pandemic would be measured in weeks as opposed to months in its duration, and therefore all your resources or many of your resources were in effect occupied by continuing to reset those events. It wasn't just simply a one cancellation and move on, and it seems to me that made your job about 10 times harder.
It did. It's the last year and a half has not been fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, as you ultimately chose a number of additional revenue sources or streams that you implemented, were there others that you considered and decided not to implement, and the ones you have were sort of the winners of that internal evaluation process? And if so, among your ideas, how did you select the ones that you ultimately went through with? What was the decision process to choose those particular additional revenue sources as opposed to other possibilities?
Well, in our industry, we run trade shows and conferences for the most part. And I run an association, but there's some basic legs to our industry. When you produce an event, you have to produce content, you have to produce revenue, and you have to produce attendees. So it's all about sales, marketing, and operations on that. For events that we own, we handle everything, and we have to basically underwrite everything, and we're at risk for everything. If we manage an event for somebody else, for an association or another company, then we don't have the financial risk, and we have better cash flow that comes in it. But we may end up with a higher volume of work, actually having to do things for them and that take longer than if we were just doing them for ourselves. So we have to take that into account as it goes forward. obviously also from our own business perspective, when we build an event of our own, we're building equity, we're building value. If we're simply doing work for hire for another entity, then there's no intrinsic value that we're building long term. It basically is good cash flow, good revenue. It keeps the lights on, it pays the bills. So ideally, we would focus exclusively on our own shows and our own events because we want to build value. But again, risk mitigation, cash flow, doing these things for others. What we looked at was some of the aspects, like, for example, we've had opportunity to take on just doing sales work for other people. That doesn't interest us as much because it takes an awful lot of time and resources, a lot more risky, and the end result isn't necessarily beneficial to us. So we've turned down some of that work over the years. We looked at doing sales agency work, which we'd done for Messe Frankfurt, actually, for years, running that. And there were shows where, again, the investment for us to do that sales agency work for a show that might be a year away, again, was not good business for us to potentially or possibly end up with revenue a year from now. So we turned that down and stopped doing that work as it went through. So we looked at many aspects, and for the most part, we've really focused on our own events and management work where we take on a substantial enough role that there's good value to us in being able to generate fee income from it.
So it sounds like you focused on things that were at least pretty close to the kinds of work that you're already doing.
Yes, it very much it's stuff that we have a good team, we have the resources, we have the knowledge. It makes sense. What we haven't tried to do is go into other areas that, frankly, are not areas we have that expertise built up in already.
So what kinds, when you were establishing or when you established the new revenue sources, was there a lot of upfront investment required on your part, or were they things that were natural extensions and maybe they didn't require a whole lot of investment?
It depended a little bit on what it involved. For example, if we take on managing another show for a client, as we've done several times, we do have to invest in staff to add on that. We don't sit around with staff with extra capacity, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for things to do. So we do have to hire appropriately to support that new event, whether it's one of our own new launches or if it's a client show that we have to take on. So that's a commitment, and that's a resource that goes forward. And that's, for example, where we had looked at doing the sales agency work. We had invested in hiring somebody years ago to do that, and we gave it 6 months to see how it worked, and it wasn't generating enough revenue to justify continuing. So we dropped that stream of that business stream that we were looking at for that very reason.
So in making those investments, were there risks involved that were concerning to you? What were the downsides in your mind, or the potential downsides that would make the addition of those revenue sources not viable potentially?
Well, as the example I just gave with the sales agency is an easy one, because it just didn't generate enough revenue to justify the investment and the time with the staffing levels and so forth to do it. On the flip side, for the events that we do manage successfully for others, there we are, the downside risk is that the amount of work is more than because we have to estimate fees. We have to agree in advance on what those fees are going to be. And in some cases, they may be revenue share fees, in which case we're at risk to some degree of our own ability to succeed, just like with our own shows. And in those cases, again, it's a matter of we're investing, we're committed. If we have to hire staff and take our own time, my partner and my time to run the event and run the team, then obviously we have to make sure that it's going to generate enough revenue to not only cover those costs of that staff, but also to provide a profit to make it worthwhile. We don't need any more hobbies. So that's obviously, we know enough about how we run our business and how we run shows and conferences to be able to estimate that time, but we're not perfect. So sometimes that can be off. But for the most part, we have been successful with it.
I really like that statement. We don't need any more hobbies. Of the revenue sources or streams that you've added, as you look back now here as we record this in mid 2021, have they all been successful? Have they been as successful as you'd hoped?
No, for sure they haven't been. Over the last 10 years, we've tried a few things that have not worked. We've had some failures that were all on us. We made a small acquisition of a conference that didn't pan out for us, and we invested a bunch of money in it, and that didn't work. And that's an example of why we have the diverse revenue streams, because knowing that we had cash flow coming in and secure revenues from fee income or these other sources enabled us to take a few gambles, so to speak, on either making small acquisitions or launching new events where there was a risk. And some of those risks have not panned out, and we've lost money on those efforts. And so but that is if they do work, and we just wrapped up. As we record, just last night, I wrapped up one small show that we own in the manufacturing industry, and that's it's not a golden goose laying egg yet, but it's a profitable event, and taking the time and risk to invest in that is something we were able to do because we had confidence that we could generate enough revenue from our other sources to be able to pay the staff and cover our costs and hopefully make money each year.
Now, that's really interesting. That's an angle of this question I candidly had not thought of, which is, not only do additional revenue streams allow you or reduce the risk of the company, but they actually can put you in a position to take other risks that you otherwise would not have felt comfortable doing.
And to be honest with you, that's the primary reason we do it. There's an easy way to reduce our risk, and that's to lower the overhead of the cost of the company and do fewer things with fewer people. But that doesn't enable us to grow. What we want to do is, obviously, like most businesses, we want to grow, and the best way to do that is to take some risks, launch new shows. In our case, in our business, launch new shows or conferences or businesses. Or invest in others as partnerships, as we've done as joint ventures. But in order to do that, we have to have some confidence that we have enough revenue and income each year to be able to afford those risks, because they don't all pan out. Far from it. It is a risky business. It may not be as risky as the restaurant business, but it's still a risky business. Not all shows succeed. Not all conferences succeed. And failures can be very expensive, to be honest with you.
So I'm curious, as you add these new revenue sources, did you have to add staff, or did you find that you could simply redeploy, particularly during coronavirus? Were you able to redeploy your existing staff to support those additional revenues?
As I said a little bit before, typically we don't have a lot of spare capacity. It's not like a factory where you've got a machine that's being used 8 hours a day, so use it for 10 or 12. Right. Pretty much our staff objective, we start asking them to work, an extra set of hours every night, as most would. So what we can do is we can reallocate responsibilities so that we can focus people. We've got marketing teams, for example, and operations teams that can, they're experts and they can focus on multiple projects at once. So we can have them multitask across multiple events, multiple conferences, and so forth. But if we take on a new show or we launch a new event, we almost always have to bring on new resources, which obviously is a cash commitment. It's obviously a time commitment for management to train and bring them up to speed. And it expands the requirements of managers to actually have more people to manage.
And was there any kind of risk or concern, or maybe even an impact, that as you added revenue sources that it might change the culture, the tenor of the company somehow? It seems to me like if one doesn't handle that exactly properly, it may actually confuse some of the people that are already there as they start to wonder, well, what business are we really in, and what's my future here, and am I going to be needed? Is this is the company going to switch business models, things of that nature? Was that ever a concern, and if so, how did you address it?
I don't think caused concern because we were very communicative to our team from the beginning. And obviously 10 years ago, we started with no team. We started from scratch. And as we hired people and brought them on board under the team, we were very open with them about our model and our goals and how we were planning to move forward. So there were very few surprises with our team as we went forward. We were also somewhat lucky in that we had structured our business model from the beginning to be a completely cloud-based infrastructure and home office-based team. So our entire team actually is spread out over 5 states, and they've worked from home since the beginning, which meant that was the only thing we didn't have to change when COVID hit last year. So we were already in that model going forward, and so it's been. That side of it has not been an issue. I think our communication with the team has been good from the start.
So may I ask you of the revenue sources or streams you've added, which one has been the most successful and why do you think it's been the most successful?
Certainly the management fees that we generate from managing shows and events and the associations for other customers is certainly the majority of our non-internal revenue, because it's our primary focus, and it's been the most valuable to us because it's what we do, it's what we know, and it's the expertise we have for our own events that we run. It's just that we're doing it for somebody else, and in some cases it's turned into virtual partnerships, for example, where we may not be true equity partners, but we may have revenue share deals in place. We've been running one particular portfolio for many, many years, and it's an ongoing partnership effectively with the client. We're invested in it. We have the expertise. We deliver the complete management of the events. The client's very happy with us. We're very happy with the results, and it's an ongoing long-term relationship.
So I'm curious, have the new revenue sources added complexity to your business and made it harder to manage? And if so, how have you addressed that?
It does add complexity because, a simple example, if we launch or own an event, we make all the decisions internally. We generate everything. We're responsible for everything, and we just do it. If we are running an event for somebody else, then we have to first make all the decisions of what we think should be done or what steps need to be done, or the processes that need to be gone through to actually sell the space, market the event, provide the operations, logistics, etc. But we then have to, in most cases, liaise with the client that actually owns the event as to why we think that needs to be done. And they may not agree with us. So there's an awful lot more communication and decision-making time involved than if we were just doing it for ourselves. So we have to factor that in when we are estimating our time, resources, and costs in actually providing those services, because the time and resources to do it for somebody else are higher than if we were just doing it for ourselves.
We're talking with David Audrain of Exposition Development Company Incorporated. And the topic is, should I diversify my company's revenue? Have the new revenue sources impacted at all how you conduct your primary business?
The biggest challenge we've come across is obviously if we make a commitment to do something for a client, then we're going to live up to that commitment and we're going to do whatever we need to do to make that happen. There have been times where maybe our own events have ended up taking a second seat to the client's events, because we can't tell the client, oh, sorry, we're busy this week. We need to, we're
right.
busy with another show. It's ours. Whereas we can tell our own team, hey, we've got to get this done before we do our own event. So we have to be very cautious and careful not to affect negatively our own events. And that we pay attention to as we're developing the plan for the client's events, as we're developing, frankly, our proposals for the clients, to ensure that we have dedicated resources that are not going to be pulled in two different directions.
And I suppose that speaks to the ongoing complexity or the additional complexity that additional revenue streams add, and that in effect you're serving two masters, if you will, whereas you'd only had to serve one. David, this has been a very good conversation. I think I've learned a lot. I think our listeners have learned a lot. There may be topics that either we didn't cover or that our listeners wish that we would have covered more. How can people? Would you be willing to take a question from somebody? And if so, what's the best way for somebody to contact you for more information?
Certainly, happy to. The easiest way is to email me, and I'm sure you'll put it on the website when you post this. But it's David@ExpoDevCo.com is my email address, and I'd be happy to respond to people.
Well, thank you. That's going to wrap it up for today's program. I'd like to thank David Audrain so much for sharing his expertise with us. We'll be exploring a new topic each week, so please tune in so that when you're faced with your next business decision, you have clear vision when making it. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider leaving a review with your favorite podcast aggregator. It helps people find us so that we can help them. If you'd like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and @Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. Once again, this is Mike Blake. Our sponsor is Redeploying, and this has been the Decision Vision Podcast.